Welcome to Resolve IBS and IBD Naturally. I'm Courtney Cowie, a nutrition therapy and functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. If you are struggling with the symptoms of IBS or IBD and want to get to the root cause of your symptoms so you can take back your health through a whole person approach, this podcast is for you. Just a disclaimer that the information I'm presenting in this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be taken as medical advice. You should always consult a qualified practitioner before making any changes to your health or medical regimen. That being said, let's get on with the show. All right, Damien Rader, I'm so happy to have you on today. For the listening audience who's been following this podcast, Damien is the lovely Abby Vallejo's life partner. She's been on the podcast many a time and she will continue to be on. So I'm really excited to have a different perspective on today. And Damien obviously is a male. So we're going to be talking about sort of an area of mental emotional health and behavioral change and in kind of that realm in terms of how it's a part of chronic health issues and can be supportive to chronic health issues. And I think for the majority of the listening audience who is more so female, I want to kind of take this to a place where you can think about how what Damien has to say might apply to your relationship with your significant other or men who are close to you in your life who want to be there to support you mentally, emotionally through your health challenges, as well as for the few men out there who are probably listening to this because they have a wife or a life partner struggling with gut health issues, or maybe a daughter or a sister that they really care about, really taking from Damien's experience and thinking through where you might be able to grow and improve in your ability to kind of be there for the women in your life who are struggling with their physical health. So um, I think before we get in, Damien, one other thing I just kind of want to say is I do feel like a lot of women struggling with gut health issues. I know this is true for me, tend to either be perfectionists or high achieving women. And so
Okay.
yeah, one of the downfalls of that is they can tend to unfortunately put others first in their life to the detriment of their own health, and then sometimes feel like they need to kind of make up for deficiencies. So be in this very active doing role and kind of taking care of business. And that's, whether they're working in their careers or at home, managing the kids, managing meals, managing the errands, right? Like a lot of that going on. And I think it can be a real block when, at least when I'm coaching these types of women one-on-one, and we have to talk about just that mental, emotional, behavioral component of looking at some of those pitfalls with how they're prioritizing these areas of their life and how that's getting in the way of them needing the time and space and making some of these changes to actually support better gut health. So that might be something you're aware of or not aware of, but I just want to kind of put that out there because I think that this will really feed into the conversation we have in terms of mindset. And we're going to get into the male female dynamic and kind of what that looks like a little bit later in our conversation. So I wanted to just kind of put that out there as well. But Damien, why don't you go ahead and just give us a little bit of background on you, your story, how you got into coaching?
All right. Well, first of all, Courtney, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the invite and I appreciate your audience taking the time to tune in. I'm Damien Rader and I'm a life purpose coach who helps men step into their potential and build lives that are filled with confidence, direction, and purpose. I grew up in Compton, California, which is notoriously a rough part of the world. I had a pretty rough upbringing. My mother was a single parent, and she was also, unfortunately, a drug addict. So I also faced my own struggles with gangs, drugs, and eventually, which led to me being incarcerated at a very young age. I was 17 years old when I was incarcerated. But ultimately, those challenges are what shaped me into being who I am today. And after turning my life around, I spent over a decade working with men and women in the form of substance abuse counseling and coaching, helping them to overcome their barriers to success. And now I specialize in guiding men and helping them break free from survival mode and discovering their purpose, whether it's through building better relationships, achieving personal goals, or just finding fulfillment in their lives. So I'm passionate about sharing what I've learned to, through my own personal experiences to help others transform their lives just like I did. Because coming from where I come from, statistically, before the age of 25, you're either supposed to be dead or in jail. And so released from, I was incarcerated from the age of 17 to the age of 22. And in the duration of my incarceration, both of my parents passed away. So it was really a wake up call for me when I was released from prison. I I had no experience as an adult whatsoever. I was a kid when I went in, and I was mentally a kid still when I came out, but I knew I had to do something. And so I chose a path to where I was like, you know what? The only way I'm going to turn this around is if I use what I've been through to help others from having to go through that. So that's pretty much what led to me becoming a counselor and a coach. And I even recently graduated with a degree in information technology. I don't know how I'm going to apply it, but that's where I'm at today.
That's awesome, Damien. And I think what's so unique, well, there's a lot of things unique about your story and about you. I think just having multiple traumas, you mentioned the loss of both your parents, like that's such a hardship. And of course, a lot of people have been in that situation and often haven't had the tools to know how to deal with those traumas, right? And then on top of that, just growing up in a really rough area, the gang element, the peer pressure, the dysfunction of having a parent that is, an addict of some sort. I mean, there's just a lot to that. And yet, despite all that, having that inner resilience or that inner drive to try to overcome and then develop tools and skills and perspective to actually turn your life around and go on a better path. I just want to ask real quick because I'm thinking of this question right now. Do
Yes.
you feel like you had already had that ability to kind of introspect and self-reflect and sort of get a little bit in touch with yourself intuitively at a deeper level, just always there present, and then going through that hardship brought it out? Or do you feel like there was a specific influence that came into your life that helped you to develop that later?
Yeah, so during the process of going through my incarceration, because if I'm being honest, I was not what they would call a good kid. I didn't have the guidance that, comes with a stable household, even if it's a dysfunctional family. My mother being a drug addict and being single, she wasn't very present. So I ended up becoming very much involved in the streets from a young age. So from there wasn't a lot of introspection. There wasn't a lot of accountability because I was surviving. I was in survival mode. And when I first got incarcerated and I'm on this bus headed to, prison at 17 years old, there was this older man and he was looking at me. He was old and he was being released after so many years. And he said, if I could just tell you anything, I would say, stay off of the yard and stay inside of the chapel or the library because everything goes down on the yard. And I'm like, okay, I had no idea what he was talking about, but I took his advice. And so, what ended up happening in that process of spending time in a library and spending time in a chapel was I began to look within. I began to read. I began to research anything that sparked my curiosity. You wouldn't see me without a book reading about something. And so I ended up asking myself, like, who do I want to be? And there was two types of people that I was seeing when I was incarcerated. There was those who were like, I'm just going to put my life on pause until I get out and then I'll resume. And then there were others who, and it kind of reminds me of like stories of religious figures like, Jesus goes into the wilderness or Buddha meditates under a tree.
Yeah.
But I was like, this is the time when I need to reflect on where I'm going. And that was my first time really being mindful that I could go within and really take a look at what it is that I need to change. And I really genuinely consciously made a decision that I want to be a better person. I don't want to hurt people. I don't want to be the person that goes down this path of hurting people and being my own life being jeopardized, ending up incarcerated or whatever that may have looked like. So that was my first experience with introspection was during that period. So it taught me that, it's okay to look within, but you have to be willing to face what it is that you're going to have to say or do when you do that, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
It does make sense, and as you're saying that, I sort of think to myself, it's kind of like being incarcerated is like a forced time out, really, kinda like COVID was for a lot of us, and I find sometimes
Absolutely.
yeah, like those experiences um, take us out of that day-to-day busyness or stress ball or, you could say micro trauma, especially growing up in Compton for you every day, you were probably forced with a lot of life or death, survival mode situations. And the brain on fire in those types of situations doesn't have the capacity to actually self-reflect. There is no prefrontal cortex like engagement when you're living life like that. And I think sometimes that can be like the real stimulus to get people to kind of really take a look at like, oh my God, where am I at? And like, is this okay for me? Like, is this where I want to stay? Right.
Yes, absolutely. And it was really challenging for me because when I was incarcerated, because I was affiliated with gangs, it was almost expected for me to continue down that path. They say blood in, blood out type of thing. So I think the guys really respected when they saw me making a conscious effort in the library and, staying out of trouble. They respected that. And then I think that's where women can start to relate to my journey, actually, because I think women feel a lot of pressure to fill roles that don't align with who they truly are.
Mhm.
And for me, it was about breaking away from those expectations and learning to be authentic and vulnerable. And for women, that might feel like having to be strong or be in control all the time. It might mean, but it might mean having to learn to let go just a little and trusting their partner to allow them to receive the support that they need. Because if I had not come out humble and vulnerable, then I wouldn't have gotten the guidance that and support that I needed when
Mhm.
I, got to that point where it was time for me to make those changes. So finding that balance to me is just so important for personal growth and strong relationships.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect segue actually into the next topic I want to kind of talk about with you, which is the whole topic of polarity. And this might be something that the listener isn't familiar with. And to be honest with you, like I actually wasn't aware of this until I started to look into and study a little bit of the work of Kim Anami, who's like a tantrika. She works a lot on just kind of improving body connection through sexual awareness, and of course, the male female kind of dynamic. And so, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole on Tantra and what that is because there's a lot of, I think, ideas about it out there. But I
Mhm.
do think this concept of polarity is very useful. And honestly, when I was kind of looking at the common challenges that men and women face in the context of relationship, and listening to the polarity conversation, I was like, "Oh my God, that's me. That's me and my partner." Like that is so many women I talk to. And what I'm really kind of referring to here is that if we look at male female, right, we've got men who are more so embracing like the yang, the masculine, which in Eastern philosophy and medicine has more of this like active nature, this sort of like go out and do, conquer, lead, stand up strong, right? It's like the active kind of moving force. And then women are more on this other end of being yin, which is kind of the receptive, the nurturing, the stable core, the stable center, kind of like the home base kind of energy, right? And so um what we see a lot, and this was something that Kim really goes into a lot in kind of her work with people, is that socially and culturally, we're seeing more and more of this kind of reversal, especially here in the US. I would say this is very common where women are stepping more into the, oh my God, I've got to go out and I got to work as hard as men. I've got to do all the things. I've got to go, 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 go. And it becomes this very active, masculine yan energy. And then men are starting to tend more in this like sort of freeze response, kind of like going passive, going almost like, um, I don't know what the right word is, but often they're sort of feeling like they're sort of helpless in a lot of situations. I think that's maybe a good way to characterize it. And it creates this really reversed dichotomy whereby, there's this disconnect, right? Because we could kind of make the argument that if we were able to stay more balanced in our true natures, men being in the yang most of the time, women being in the yin most of the time, there's that natural complement and energy that kind of keeps us stable and connected. But with this polarity reversal, that can be a real driving force that creates a lot of frustrations and unmet expectations and just disconnect in relationships. And so I wanted to kind of ask you about that, Damien, because I'm sure this is a concept that you've also come across too and potentially even studied, and kind of get your thoughts on what you think is going on with this whole reversal, and why this tends to happen to men and women in relationships.
Yes, absolutely. So, like I said earlier in my career, I did work with both men and women. For over a decade, I worked with both sexes. And what I found, as far as women are concerned, this polarity reversal happens um, when a woman does not feel safe within the relationship. And so it may not necessarily be like a threat of danger, like someone's coming to harm me. But let's say, for instance, we have financial obligations, and the man's income alone is not enough to support all of, for fulfill everything that needs to be paid. Then the woman might feel, okay, I need to step more into my masculine, that energy of just taking charge and, you know, taking control, right?
Mhm.
And they end up, it can throw things off balance because, like you said, it's a yin and a yang, which that's the balance of the universe. There's the day, the night, there's hot, there's cold, there's polarity in literally everything that we see. So in our relationships, once we throw that balance off, it could be from societal pressures or from past experiences where the woman just feels like she has to take charge out of necessity, and the man might not know how to step into his role, so she fulfills it. If there's not good communication where the woman can express like, hey, I feel like you may be lacking in this area and that's making me feel unsafe, she'll
Mhm.
step into that role and fulfill it herself, but then that causes that imbalance. So in order to fix it, what I found is that both parties kind of have to recognize their natural strengths and work together to restore that balance, because, and that takes vulnerability and trust, right? Vulnerability can be so scary because what vulnerability is vulnerability, the way that I've heard it described, and it resonates with me always, is vulnerability is the puppy. When we see a puppy, we're drawn to it because we understand that it's vulnerable. It's very vulnerable. We want to hold it, we want to cuddle it, we want to support it in any way we can. But we also know that understand that that's because this that vulnerability also puts it in danger. It makes it something that isn't necessarily safe. So vulnerability can be scary, but it's also the way that we open up those pathways to where we can get that help and that
Mhm.
support that we need. And the way that we do that is by communicating where it is that we feel vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a real delicate balance, and I think it can be very elusive, especially for men, because there's this dichotomy of like, how do I be a quote unquote strong man but engage that softer side emotionally that can actually really tap into how do I feel, and opening up to women in that way can often get them to feel like, oh God, you got me, like you emotionally, you've got me, right? And that's a part of it too, which, as you say all this, Damien, I sort of wonder, I'm for sure not a social expert, but I think just the way culture has gone. I mean, there's a lot of economic reasons why life is so much harder nowadays than it was in the 40s and 50s. And I would say, potentially even in the 60s for two parent households, because it really does in most situations take two incomes to be able to have a decent quality of life, right? With just the cost of living and, inflation and just wages not keeping up with inflation, right? There's a lot of things that have kind of shifted in a harder direction for today's generation compared to where it was 50, 100 years ago. So
Mhm.
unfortunately, it's led a little bit to this breakdown of the traditional male female division of labor in the household where you'd have the man go out and be the breadwinner and that was kind of his domain. And you think about it just from like simplicity, right? Like whether a woman wants to stay at home and take care of the house and the children and kind of be the home worker, if you will, and the man goes out, it does make it more simplistic and less complicated to have those clean divisions of labor, right? And now we're kind of in this world where both parties are going out to work because they kind of have to by necessity. And then on top of that, being at home and having all those household duties is another pretty much full-time job. And so I think for women, it can often feel overwhelming and just daunting to keep up with all of that if there isn't that good communication, division of labor, sort of understanding of how are we both supporting each other continuously and adapting and being flexible with our needs. And then you add a chronic health strain to that, right? It's like the straw that breaks the camel's back because typically if it's one person and a couple affected, it becomes this like energy drain. And I mean, I've just found across the board, it's really hard for people to show up as the best version of themselves when they've got this really major physical health struggle going on that's really tapping their ability to have patience, have understanding, have that energy to handle all of these different things going on. Um, so there's that. And I think with regards to men too, I think there's also been just a lot of changes over time with more and more single parents. Like you even mentioned too, Damien, you were raised by your mom predominantly, right? And just
Yes.
as that becomes more and more a reality, where do men get those strong male role models, right? Growing up, like if they don't have that, that's automatically sort of setting the stage for how do I, as a man, learn how to be a strong man if I'm not learning it from my father? And you look at culture, and culture is very messed up too, and the messages that it's giving men as well. So I think it could be really challenging, right?
Yes, and I think that's where we get the distorted version of what masculinity looks like
Yes.
because it's it's the man trying to figure out what is my role without the masculine or the male example being present. And
Mhm.
even if they have had men present, they may not have been the best examples. So they
Yeah.
end up kind of freestyling what it is that they feel masculinity is and what it should look like. And it
Yeah.
takes a lot of introspection and really, I would say, a study of culture historically to see what the masculine role truly is. Because when you look at what we are primitively, the man is anatomically designed to be a stronger protector type of
Mhm.
role, while the
Mhm.
woman is designed to be strong, but in the sense of, let's I'm going to be strong for the two of us and for the children as well.
Mhm.
It's a
Mhm.
different type of strength that's required. And so that dynamic has really shifted. We don't see that very often, the the balancing in the masculine and feminine roles nowadays.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's just a testament to what a need there is for men like you to be out there in the world coaching other men, right? Who may not have had this type of template or model and want to change, but they're just really lacking the understanding or the know-how as to like, what am I supposed to be doing and how am I supposed to get there? And, I can just speak from my experience with, knowing and working with many therapists, and therapy is amazing, right? But it is mostly female dominant, right? Because a lot of women, I think, naturally gravitate towards those roles of, service-based, human-based work. And the truth of it is there's a lot of men out there who need that support too. And I think being able to work with another man who has those skills to really model and help them come into that deeper sense of themselves. I mean, it's just so hard to find people, men like you, who want to do that work and who really are passionate about it, right?
Yes, absolutely. And that's the beauty of coaching is that it's not as formal as, say, therapy.
Yeah.
And it's really just the process that helps to bridge the gap from where people are and where they want to be. And it's not about telling somebody what they should do, or telling them what to do or solving the problems for them, but it's about guiding them to uncover their own answers and set clear goals and actions. So as a coach, I provide tools, accountability, and perspective to help them get unstuck and build the life that they want. It's
Mhm.
like it's like literally like having a coach or a teammate whose sole focus is your growth and success. And that's not something that we see in a lot of today's society. For me, it's especially about helping men to step into their potential and aligning it with their purpose so that they can actually create lasting changes in their life. And what that means is having healthier relationships, better communication, and personal accountability because
Mhm.
that's where a lot of men and women get stuck because we lack that personal accountability, which is that introspection piece that we keep revisiting. That seems to be a recurring theme in this episode. Is that personal accountability is what causes us to look within, and that's where the real change is going to happen. And it may sound cliche or even philosophical, but when we make those changes within, then that affects our environment around us. People are going to what's the reciprocate
Mhm.
what the energy that we are giving out, like sort of like an echo, or even the force that you throw a tennis ball at a wall with. That force is it's gonna come back to you with that. It's gonna try to match that force. So I think once we start to work on ourselves and really get vulnerable and honest with ourselves, and that's when we start to see um, the people in our lives be a bit more willing to work with us as well.
Yeah, I would agree 100% with that, Damien. And I think it's a really good way, just in that little explanation of how to really understand coaching versus therapy, right? And I mean, there's definitely a place for therapy. Um, Going through right now, I'm actually going through a master health coaching certification program, and I've really found it to be very much on point with what you said, where the goal is to put the client in the driver's seat. And I feel like if you're coaching them well, there's a consistent thread through the work you're doing together. There's like, that thread you're following out with all of those sessions where every time you're touching base, you're kind of looking at what was the action step we decided on? How did that go for you? Was that moving you in the right direction? And you're going to be in this place of constantly reevaluating, evaluating, what came up for you, right? Like all of those things are so important versus in therapy, I think sometimes what can happen is it can become more of a dumping ground for all kinds of stressors and grievances. And I mean, sometimes people just need to rant and get that stuff off their chest. But again, this is my personal experience. One of the weaknesses I find, especially if you are more of a proactive person, and sometimes people don't know how to be proactive until they're coached to understand that. But I know for me, I'm a pretty proactive person, is leaving the session and thinking, what's the takeaway? Like, what am I supposed to be working on? Like that's the coaching part where you're actually really making it clear, like, this is what you want to do. And let's confirm this together. And let's be very clear on, like, it's not like a mystery what's going to happen between today's session and the next session. Like, we need to be able to come back together and evaluate, like, how did that go? Right. Would you kind of agree with that, Damien?
Absolutely. I so for my approach, one of the tools that I use is known as the stages of change. And what the stages of change is, it's basically a roadmap of where you are as far as motivation to accomplish goals are. So we'll say you might be in the pre-contemplation phase, which would be the very first where you're not even thinking of changes. You might not be even be aware that there's a problem.
Mhm.
But in then the next phase would be contemplation, where you're like, hey, maybe I can stand to, work on this particular thing, or, maybe I should start considering that. And that's where so we can kind of gauge where someone is at, because then you have the preparation phase and then you have the action phase. And just based on conversations with someone, reflective feedback, and really getting them to identify what it is that they're truly struggling with, we can identify how ready they are to take on challenges with the stages of change. That's one of the, beauties of like having so many people who have helped people in the past. Like we have these tools and roadmaps that we can use in our journey to help others. And that's one of the things that I've really found. So I would encourage the viewers to look into the stages of change and apply it
Mhm.
to their own journey and see what part of the journey of the stages of change resonates with them, and that will let them know, okay, I can step it up here, or I'm doing well, or I need more support.
Yeah, for sure. And I think actually that kind of transitions into a question I was going to ask you too, Damien, which is kind of like, how would a man or even a woman know that they're ready for coaching or they could benefit from coaching and they need that help finding their purpose? Is it Would you say that using the stages of change applied to themselves is a good way to kind of like, oh, I'm not really in that place where I really want to make it, accept I have a problem? Do you feel like they have to at least be in that first stage of change where they're problem aware and they're already kind of like, ooh, I don't like this. This is painful for me. I know that something needs to happen. Would you say that's kind of true?
Absolutely. So there are two types of motivations. There's intrinsic motivation, which is coming from within you, the person, I want this for me. And then there's extrinsic motivation, which is coming from outside of us. And that can look like societal expectations, it can look like family, there are our significant others' expectations of us. And what I found is that those extrinsic motivators don't typically motivate us to make lasting changes. It has to come from within. So if a
Mm,
man feels like he's stuck, he's in survival mode, working a steady job, but he's feeling unfulfilled, it's a sign he might benefit from coaching, but he has to be the one to recognize that.
mm,
And coaching is for not just for men, it's for, I word it with men because I work with men so often, but it's for people who feel like they're capable of more, but they don't know where to start. And it's about realizing that getting by isn't the same as truly living with purpose and passion, right? And
mhm,
so what makes someone coachable or not coachable is, are they willing to take a look at themselves honestly? Like, are they willing to take responsibility and make changes?
mhm,
On the other hand, like someone who avoids accountability, blames others, or isn't open to self-reflection or hard work, those are the ones that are not necessarily hard work, but they're the ones that are harder to work with, right?
mhm. Yeah.
Because growth takes vulnerability and it takes a willingness to improve. And so that's something that I look for when I work with someone is, do they want this for themselves?
Yeah.
That is actually one of the requirements that I have, is that it's not, I'm being forced to do this. And I've worked with clients like that. There's the hope that they'll go from that pre-contemplation stage to contemplation or even action,
Mhm.
but that we don't see a lot of, we don't see good results with that. We see the best results when someone is like, I need this for me. I've
Yeah.
reached that point, and it usually, a lot of times, it takes hitting a rock bottom, or which is doing that thing or being in that place that is just like, this isn't me. And I really want to do better, and feeling it, because that feeling it, as opposed to just hearing it or someone saying that would be good for you, coming from outside of you, it doesn't, it's not the same as you having that realization, coming to that realization on your own. So intrinsic motivation, I would say, is like a key to seeing someone start to make those changes.
Are your struggles with bloating, constipation, and diarrhea keeping you home on Friday, Saturday nights, clicking through Netflix because you're dealing with stomach cramping? Or simply need to have a bathroom nearby? Have you stopped being active and joining your friends at the gym because it flares your symptoms and wipes you out for the rest of the day? How about avoiding social gatherings involving food because of extreme anxiety over food reactions or sudden bathroom runs in public? Or because you are too embarrassed to explain your limited diet to others? The isolation, loneliness, and depression that comes with an IBS or IBD struggle is real and often worse than the physical symptoms. I'm here to tell you that you deserve better than just living with this reality and suffering alone. From a person who has lived this nightmare and come out the other end and who has helped many others do the same, there is hope and you are worth the investment. Click the link below to schedule your free 15-minute gut check call. I think that's so beautifully said, Damien. And I'm so glad you said all that because I've absolutely found that to be true as well. And, just becoming a coach myself, even prior to that, because I probably was already dabbling in some of these tools just through my own self growth. It's revolutionary to take 100% accountability and responsibility for everything, right? And I can actually be in a place where I can acknowledge this choice I'm making in my life is not a good one, right? Like it's creating more stress for me. But when you say it that way, when you say, I'm consciously though choosing to do this, even though there's a trade-off to it, you own that, right? Versus saying like, I have no choice and I have to do that because of X, Y, Z circumstance. I think that's where you really start to relate differently to what you do and don't have control over when it comes to stressors in life. And the truth is, life is always going to throw you curveballs. There's always going to be things you can attribute stress to, but realizing that you have a lot more control than you think over how you perceive these situations or the choices you might make around these situations. I think that's really freeing. And, to kind of just piggyback on what you were saying, I think just a big piece of grouping kind of people collectively into two categories. You've kind of got people that might be stuck more in the I'm a victim of my life. And, every time things go bad, I'm kind of looking to this outside factor to pin it on and blame it on, right? Versus those that, like you said, typically it will take a really big hardship, rock bottom circumstance where it's like suddenly the light bulb goes off and it's like, okay, there's a pattern here. And the common thread is me. So, like, what if all along this is about me? And maybe I actually have to look at me and kind of how I'm moving through my life and navigating these circumstances. And I think just seeing those patterns, like that was one thing I know I had to do for myself is like, what are the same maladaptive themes that keep showing up in my life, right? Like, that's huge to get to that place and say, oh my God, it's, I have to start with me, right? Like you always have to start with you is kind of the way I see it.
Absolutely. And another thing about that rock bottom piece, a lot of times we'll see our loved ones or we'll see someone and we'll think they're at their rock bottom and that they should be ready for change. But it doesn't work that way. A rock bottom is very personal. It has to be a personal rock bottom. And that is the thing that only someone, a place that only someone can get themselves to where they're like, okay, I just can't take anymore, or I need to make changes for my loved ones, whatever that might look like. And so what we see that in especially with the women that you work with, they might see that the men in their life struggle to support them, when they're facing their chronic issues. And so I think what happens is that a lot of men feel stuck when they feel like they can't fix a problem. So
Mhm.
what ends up happening in that instance is that as men, we either pull back or we become passive, right? And passive is I have no rights. You have all the rights. But what that means in this context is that I have no expertise in what you're going through. And since you're the one going through it, you're doing the research, then they might feel like they lack understanding. And then so highlights like where they might lack the emotional tools or the understanding to help someone. And what they need to do is actually focus on listening and being more present. And it's not just about like solving the issues, but showing up in a way that strengthens the relationship.
Mhm.
And so that involves a lot of communication. So if this is you, the woman who finds that her partner is in that passive mode because he doesn't know how to help you with your issues, then it's going to take a different type of communication, a communication where he feels encouraged, a communication where he feels safe to not know the answers that you can provide him without him feeling like he's done something wrong or he doesn't have the tools to help you.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, 100%, Damien. I think you're kinda hitting on a lot of my questions I was gonna ask you in
Okay.
terms of, like, men and women and this dynamic. Yeah, so
Yeah.
within the context of, say, like, a male-female couple where she's really on this path of chronic gut struggle, it's really affecting her energy, her mental health, her ability to get things done. Um, why do you think men struggle? I mean, you might have touched on this, but why do you think they struggle with that type of shift? And why do you think they go passive instead of, say, becoming more active? Maybe I'm kind of flipping the question a little bit here.
Mhm.
Yeah.
No, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Mm, again, a man, he when he feels like he doesn't know the answers, like he can't fix something, he will step into a passive role because it's better to in the man's mind to
Mhm.
take that passive role rather than to continue to fail as we would perceive it or to inadequately support our partner. And
Mm.
so I would say to them, the most important thing to do is to listen without trying to fix everything because
Mhm.
women need to feel heard and supported emotionally, right?
Mhm.
So it would be his role to take on like the practical type of tasks to ease her stress, but also focus on his own emotional growth, which is uh, being steady and empathetic towards her because that can make all the difference in her healing process and ultimately strengthen the connection, right? So there has to be this degree of vulnerability on both ends. I need, as the man who's supporting my partner, to be willing to understand like I don't have to have all the answers, but I
Mhm.
need to be present regardless. And for the woman, that's giving the safe space, like even though he may not have all the answers, am I providing him the space to learn what he needs to be more supportive of me?
Yeah.
And it's ideal. It's not always that easy or straightforward, but this is like the foundational piece of it is um, allowing that empathetic safe space where we can communicate more openly.
And so for women who are in that dynamic, who are really struggling and maybe feeling like, oh my God, I don't know if I can show up any better. What would you recommend to them that would be a tangible thing they could think about to try to support this better polarity, if you will, right? Like, um, what's one thing women can think about to try to improve this whole space so that it allows men to actually come forward and become better listeners?
Yeah, start by communicating openly and kindly about what you need, but also ask yourself if you've given your partner enough space to take responsibility because he can't get it right if you don't allow him the opportunity to. So encourage him to step up by trusting him with something and recognizing his efforts. Even if they're small, they're still like a step towards the
Mm.
right direction. So allowing that space for the partner to take responsibility, definitely.
I love that. I think the only other question I wanted to touch on that maybe we didn't entirely cover is, within the whole vulnerability piece, do you find for men that it is a little bit harder for them to actually access and tap into a broad range of emotions other than anger. I've just found experientially that a lot of men understand anger really well. And you probably know this too, Damien, because a lot of therapists will talk about the anger iceberg, right? How that's the tip of the emotional sphere. But below that, there's usually these deeper, more vulnerable emotions. And I think, again, in our culture, women are socialized to be more emotional creatures. I mean, we're wired that way brain wise too. So it just comes more naturally for us to, it's more socially appropriate, for example, for women to cry publicly. Not that we want to, but right, like in the context of how we express outwardly, right? Like I think it's very hard for men to know how to do this because of the cultural expectations, the model, we have in society, but then also potentially just not having the tools to understand what's really beneath the surface here, right?
Yes, absolutely, definitely. So, what I found with men, anger is often the go-to emotion for men because it feels safe. It doesn't make
Mhm.
them feel vulnerable. It's
Yeah.
almost like a mask, you know. Um, the word persona that we use in our everyday language, whenever we use that word, it comes from a Latin word, which personae, which means it was the mask that the stage players wore.
Mm,
Um, and so it's literally when we put on this persona of being an angry, tough male, it's a mask to shield us from being vulnerable. And but when we do this, the other emotions like sadness and fear, we're ignoring those, then it creates a disconnect from ourselves and our relationship. So helping men to really understand and process their emotions is going to be key to building that awareness, that empathy, and that deeper sense of purpose that they need in order to be supportive. So yes, I've seen many men default to anger, but anger also stems from there's two causes of anger, right? So the first cause is, and this is not just for men, this is for anyone. The two
mhm,
causes of anger is one, feeling like something is not within our controls. We're out of control. We have no control over something. The response is anger. And
mhm,
also feeling like we're not being heard or understood. And
mhm,
this is where we see the raising of voices. We see the, becoming more animated because we feel the message that we are trying to convey isn't being understood. And so this is where we see anger. So for a man who doesn't have the adequate tools to express an emotion, he may have lacked the emotional maturity to express the degree of emotion he's feeling.
mhm,
Um, that then goes into that lack of control and that not feeling understood piece, and it comes out as anger.
yeah,
So we have to find a way to communicate in a way that isn't blaming or you're right, I'm wrong. But the key is to come to an understanding. This I hear, and what I do often is what I hear you saying is, and I'll
mhm,
repeat back what the person says because what this does, it not only validates what the person is saying, but it shows them that you're listening to what they're saying and paying
mhm,
attention to what they're saying. So um, this will lower defenses as well. So reflective feedback. What I hear you saying is this, and it's making you feel this way without
mhm.
attacking, but just understanding that the ultimate goal is to come to common ground where we can ultimately come to a solution or whatever the goal may be.
Yeah, it's the whole seeking to understand skill, which is so difficult. And because it slows down the conversation too, right? Because you kind of have
Absolutely.
to get that double confirmation every time one person talks. It's like, okay, I have to show you now I got what you said. And then baton is passed, right? And that person talks. And then
Right,
they
because
understand. Yeah.
that's going to let them know that you're not against them. You're with them. You're making an effort to understand where they're coming from. I'm not saying that your side is wrong. I'm just trying to understand your
Right.
perspective.
Right, exactly, Damien. Yeah, and I think it's like becoming a baby again, right? Because we get so fixed in these patterns of, well, and this is, I think, also another challenge within long-term relationships. There's a lot of wiring pathways now that are very like ingrained because we are this way as humans, right? Like we get used to kind of getting into patterns, whether it's with ourselves and the habits we have every day or within relationships. And it's that whole anticipating what you think is going to happen and jumping to a conclusion or an assumption, and that will often bypass that whole ability to say like, okay, wait a minute, I'm just going to take the assumption out and purely be in curiosity mode. Like what is it you're actually trying to convey to me? Like you have to, it's like that childlike mind. You have to almost take that on, right?
Yes, I love that, like that curiosity mode. Like, it would be so nice if we could just default to that,
Yeah.
like as opposed to having expectations and the expectations aren't like, oh, I've got this expectation for you. It's based on patterns. That's how we as humans live. We adapt based on
Mhm.
patterns that we see. If we saw something that was not a solid liquid or a gas, we would say, oh, it kind of looks like a liquid or it kind of looks like a gas. It's like based on what it is that we've seen in the past. So that's where
Yeah.
the expectation piece, it would be so nice if we could just kind of default to that curiosity about our partner
Yeah.
and allow that space to grow. Because what ends up happening with expectations, and it's a cliche, but expectations are setting you up for disappointment, right? Because we
Mhm.
can't control the behaviors or the feelings or thoughts of others. So when we place an expectation, then a lot of time these expectations that we place on other people, we don't even verbalize them to the other person. It's an
That's
unspoken
true.
expectation,
Mhm.
and so that ends up turning into resentment when they don't fulfill that unspoken expectation. And so
Mhm.
that resentment, it comes from those unmet expectations, and we start to resent our partner. So what we end up having to do is we have to we end up putting ourselves in a position where we need to start communicating more openly about what we need, as
Yeah.
opposed to making the assumptions that our partner should know based on patterns of what we need. It's not fair for us to place expectations on others just because of their role in our life.
Mhm.
Like, we have to give them that space to take responsibility once again. So encourage them to step up by trusting them and just, recognize their efforts. Um, yeah, like that's that vulnerability piece. That's why that keeps coming up. It's just there has to be trust, there has to be vulnerability. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure, Damien. And I think for the majority of women that fall into this camp, struggling with health issues, gut health especially, I really think the biggest piece for them is to get into that space where they can also take better care of themselves first and foremost, so that
Mhm.
they're coming into that dynamic more fulfilled, more patient. There's less of that survival mode going on where it's like the brain on fire, right? Because to be able to exercise all of these skills and tools, quite honestly, if you are in that stressed out space, it's so hard to do that. I just think bringing that energy into a relationship consistently is going to be an uphill battle. And I think for women, again, just based on my own experience, based on working with a lot of women with similar wiring, like it can be really hard for them to let go of the things they need to let go of to put themselves in a place where they're giving themselves whatever it is, the time to read a book and just de-stress and relax, the time to take a bath, the time to just do nothing, the time to have a cup of tea, whatever it is, right? Like it's that sense of like, I don't want to feel selfish, I don't want to feel like I'm letting somebody down. Like that's such a common thought pattern that women can fall into, but I know the truth of it is that it's actually ultimately helping you support your relationships if you can bring your brain into a more balanced, calm state. Because what is the point of running around like a chicken with your head cut off if now you're not able to be as balanced as you could be with your partner or with your kids, right? It's that double-edged sword where we want to check all the boxes and do all the things, but not acknowledge we have limits and we have those like ceilings to what's possible energetically, emotionally, physically for us too. And all the more so if you're not well, you have to honor that your energetic threshold is going to be a lot lower than a healthy person's, right? And that just kind of is. And sometimes I think getting to that place of just acceptance of like, this is where I'm at right now. Acceptance isn't complacency, but I think it's helpful to take some of our own self expectations down to a level that's more realistic. So we're not constantly having this inner critic or bully say like, you're not doing enough, right? Like, and I'm speaking very much so to the female psychology in terms of like chronic illness, and then how that can ultimately not help her show up well in these other relationships in her life, right?
Yes, absolutely. I
Yeah.
agree.
So, one question I thought of just for you too, real quick here, Damien, do you feel like everybody has a rock bottom?
That's a great question. And I do. I do believe everyone has a rock bottom, but what that looks like is going to look different for everyone based on what they've been through. Like I said, we base everything on what we've experienced previously.
Mhm.
So my rock bottom, losing my parents while incarcerated, being incarcerated at such a young age, that's a very deep bottom, for me. So that's pretty much the worst thing I've been through. So everything that I go through now is just, I compare it, I put it up against that.
Yeah.
But for someone, the suburban housewife who, might have she didn't grow up in the streets or anything like that, but she's been through some things that were stressful for her, and
Mhm.
that's her rock bottom,
Mhm.
and so it looks different for everyone, and it's really about what makes it a rock bottom isn't how bad of a situation it is, to what degree it's what degree it affected you, right? Like,
Mhm.
um, how did that how does that make you feel? Does it cause a shift or change in perspective for you to feel motivated enough to finally embrace change or say enough is enough?
Mhm. Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. I think
It's
that's
ve- it's
awesome.
it's very personal. Yes, absolutely.
It's very personal, and that would explain why some people have to go through multiple hardships and traumas before they get there, and it's that's kind of the origin of my question. Because yeah, I mean, I definitely think if for some people it can come late in life if they're gonna hit one, right? Some people never have severe life challenges. That's a possibility too. You know, some people maybe have a little bit more, what do you call it, like stardust sprinkled on their life path. They're just not gonna get hit with a lot of hardship, but I do think when you look at major change in personal evolution, for most people, the common triggering factor is some really significant emotionally, mentally, like distressing event that they went through that, caused them to examine their life and say, like, okay, enough is enough, right?
Yes. And we're not just going to have one rock bottom in our entire life, like you can have a bottom often, depending on what your standards are, what your goals are, or maybe you had an expectation of yourself that wasn't fulfilled, and it feels like, okay, this is a low for me, not in a way of getting down on ourselves, but a way of motivating ourselves to, you know say, hey, I that to get us contemplating, right? Like that
Yeah.
contemplation stage of change.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think this is kind of just a common place most people that end up deciding to work with you or me have to be. They have to be at that place of, gosh, the circumstance I'm in right now is really painful. It's so painful. I really want to change it. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes, no matter how hard it is. I'm not going to say they're willing to spend as much money as it takes, but within reason, right? Like if it's
Hmm.
reachable, and people will be very resourceful and find ways to access funds to pay for what they think is really going to change this painful situation for them if they believe in it, right? Because that pain sucks. And I think that's one thing I'm always kind of listening for when I'm doing a consult with a prospective client is like, where are you at and how you're relating to this physical health challenge? And am I hearing these signals that like this is a real problem, and like you're kind of like, I can't afford to be on this path anymore, and I know I need help from someone. And the question is, who is it going to be, right? Or which like process is going to get me there? And so that's a much I want to say like easier stage of change. Like it's almost like I would say a prerequisite for someone to really feel compelled to move forward and want to do this kind of work. And with coaching, I think it's exactly the same too, right?
Yes, absolutely. And so I think like that there's a theme that is associated with the rock bottom, and that theme is actually desperation.
Yeah.
And then there's some words, then this is why people they're afraid to work on themselves because the words that are associated with the change is that, there's desperation, but there's also humiliation
Mm,
because what we find is the root word of humiliation is humility. And so in order for me to be humbled enough that have that degree of humility to make the changes, it comes with a certain degree of humiliation. And
mhm,
that can be exposing what needs to be worked on or admitting that we're powerless against what it is we're facing and we need help.
mhm.
So I think that that is a key factor as well, is that sometimes, we don't want to accept that it's not going to be the best circumstances or mindset that we're in. But I think coaching can help a lot with that, right? So coaching really helps to provide a structure and accountability for helping people like really reflect on the habits that their habits, and to make those meaningful changes, because it's not just about reaching your goals, but understanding why the goals matter, and
Mhm.
transforming how you think. For men, coaching often involves like aligning their actions with their values and building the confidence in order for them to go after what it is that, you know, they to live that life of purpose.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So, is there anything else that you feel would be useful to share, Damien, before we wrap up for the listening audience or just in general about the work you do with men?
Yes, absolutely. There's one more thing, and this may be foreign to your audience. It may resonate with some of them or not, but one of the things that kind of had me step away from more of the substance abuse counseling portion into the life coaching portion was that I found that there are some substances that seem to cause dependency, and really they use them as tools to aid in treating addiction, but they are things that are harmful and addicting themselves. And
Mm,
so what I ended up finding on my journey was what is known as plant medicines. And these plant medicines are herbs and plants that have been used in indigenous cultures for so long. And these plant medicines like ayahuasca and psilocybin, I'm just going to name them here, but I'd encourage the viewers to do their research if they're interested. But
yeah.
they can help people to confront emotions they've buried and gain clarity about their lives. And for men, I think it could be a helpful tool to help them break down those emotional walls and help them to reconnect with themselves. Like when we talk about that anger piece, it forces them to take the mask off and look within. And it's not a cure all. I'm not saying like this is like some magic cure all, but when it's done in a safe, guided setting, it can be a powerful tool alongside with that self work, that willingness to do the work. So
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, Damien. I had kind of forgotten that I did want to ask you about that. And, from just my own personal experience, I've utilized ketamine as a tool to help when I've been in pretty challenging stages of my life as well, as of recent, even too. And I would agree with you that it's not just this like amazing band-aid you can slap on an issue like depression or anxiety, but from what I understand and doing my own research and then my own personal experience, it can really help with the neuroplasticity of rewiring thinking patterns that have really been bad for a long time, or, helping to ingrain new behavioral change. And then of course, it kind of opens up that door to the subconscious on a deeper level. So, I found that to really get a lot out of it, the prep work going into it was really important too. Like I certainly had experiences where I was rushed and kind of like tried to do a 10-minute setup and then it was not as productive for me versus like taking more time and really trying to, it's like this with relationships too. Like you wouldn't plan this amazing date night where you're going to have this amazing like intimate experience by going into it rushed in 10 minutes, right? Like it really can help to set the stage and take actually an entire day to kind of get yourself slowly working towards that or into that time frame. So I would assume that with a lot of these other plant-based medicines, psilocybin, I mean, ayahuasca is its own animal entirely, where I would almost say
Mhm.
you'd best go to like a retreat center and do a very
Absolutely.
immersive, yeah, experience. You couldn't just, go from a typical day into something like that. But with some of these ones that are more mild, but still have the ability to start that process of, deeper understanding and understanding some of these root cause traumas or feelings or sort of states that are stuck in the body. I really found that it's not like you just pop a pill and all is good, and the one other thing I wanted to mention as we're on this topic that's kind of a pet peeve of mine when it comes to a lot of the therapy world is that there's still a lot of buy-in I found out there because of conventional medicine being our, basically our go-to for how to fix all of these issues, including mental health, that SSRI drugs like Prozac and Lexapro are actually effective. And you can go out and actually find research showing that they work no better than the placebo sugar pill, right? So, like,
Mhm.
this can be one of these, like, and I realize what I'm saying could sound very controversial, and the listener can feel free to disagree with this, but I would definitely encourage you to really do your own research and look into this because I do think if you're in a bad place in your life, and it feels like you have to go on a medication to even consider contemplating change or contemplating working with a coach or contemplating working with a therapist. The plant-based medicines are an alternative to that people might not necessarily be aware of or think about. And this is where I think using both, right? Like, maybe using them as a tool to help get you from a really pretty bad place to working the right direction in tandem with doing coaching, in tandem with doing therapy. Like, I would actually find that to be a lot more effective in terms of what some of these medicines have been shown to do to the brain to really actually have a tangible impact on helping people, resolve these feeling states and resolve some of these traumas. Would you agree with that, Damien?
Yes, I would. But from the research that I've done and also my experience working with these plant medicines, that I found that one session with psilocybin can be like equivalent of 10 sessions with a therapist. And I
Wow.
don't understand the spiritual or cosmic way or how this plant medicine works with us the way it does, but it does. It's even to the degree where some of them are known as golden teachers, or Maria Sabina, who introduced psilocybin to the United States from Mexico. She was an elderly Mexican shaman. She
Mhm.
used to call them the little angels or the little teachers or something of that nature. And so they really do help to guide you towards more introspection. And also, I've even heard reports of physical healing from some of these plant medicines as well. And we're seeing that more and more nowadays because what it ended up happening in the 1960s, Timothy Leary, Ram Dass, they got really excited about these psychedelic plant medicines that they were finding. And everyone, then this is where we get that hippie movement, was going crazy like we feel absolutely great, fantastic, and we want to dance in the middle of the street. We don't want to go to work anymore, and so
Yeah.
and this is why that controlled environment is so important because you don't want to be like, yeah, no, I'm absolutely fine. I don't want to do anything but have fun in life, which
Oh
is
gosh.
which isn't a bad place to be mentally, but
Yeah.
you do want to have some structure in your life, but in recent years they've reintroduced or as a result of that, the research for plant medicines was suppressed for a very long time. And only in recent years, after like the 2000s, have we started to see a re-emergence of these plant medicines being used in therapies. And
Mhm.
they've had absolutely amazing, just astonishing results. And we're starting to learn more and more. But this isn't uncommon. We've seen plants demonized in the past, such as THC, marijuana, right?
Mhm.
Back in time, at a time, there was a time where it was thought to cause reefer madness. And if your teenager smokes this, he's going to drive off of a cliff and, just be out of his mind. But now we know that THC and CBD, which is the derivatives of this hemp plant,
Mhm.
they aid people with pain. There's actually a place in our cells for to receive this THC medicine called cannabinoids, and
Yep.
the proper name for marijuana THC is cannabis. So
Mhm.
basically, there's a slot, a plug-in, like you would plug a device into the wall. There's a
Mhm.
plug in our cells for the cannabis. And so the cannabinoids, once the cell is filled with cannabis, actually begins to heal the body. And this is where we see a lot of um, CBD being used to treat cancer patients and being
Mhm.
used to treat chronic pain and things of that nature. So I
Yeah.
just say that to say that we are seeing a lot of good research coming out of plant-based medicines, especially in promoting self-awareness and helping people to reconnect with themselves.
Oh, for sure, Damien. Yeah. And I know that when I was doing a lot of just looking into things like Rick Simpson oil, which is a concentrate of all of the cannabinoids plus THC derived from the
No.
cannabis plant, right? Like probably actually one of the more potent ways you can like ingest it. And typically you do ingest it, right? But like
Mhm.
it was from what I remember, there was some thinking that some of these conditions, if you're using it more for chronic inflammatory disorders, even things like autoimmune disease, that the body's own endogenous cannabinoid production, which because we do produce our own, right, to a certain extent, in some of these individuals was actually lowered and with the thinking that if they take this supplementally, it's helping to kind of bridge that gap. And that's one of the reasons why it can be helpful and help them actually mitigate that inflammation or have the results, on the physical health level as well. So, yeah, that's interesting. The other thing I was going to mention with regards to Ram Dass, I don't know if you had heard this story, Damien, but like from what I remember, I think he at the time like went over to India and had some like meeting with a yogi over there and he had some psychedelic drug on him. I don't know if it was LSD or what, but like it was like a really crazy experience where that yogi knew he had it on him and is like, why don't you just give it to me? And he took it and it just nothing happened, right? And like Ram Dass
I've
is like,
heard that story.
was just like, oh my God, how is it possible? This guy just took this substance that should be having this major impact. It was just like completely like no change. Like they continue to have this conversation. And it makes me think about the work of like Dr. Joe Dispenza. I don't know if you've like heard of him. He's gotten quite a large following for, the results he's been able to help people achieve through focused meditation techniques, right? Where you're really working to like get the body into this energetic state of this future self potential. And it's using both feeling and visualization and imagination, like all of that. And just how powerful the brain is when you apply it that way that, he's had many, many people in his meditation retreats have awakening experiences where literally like the pituitary gland just goes off, right? And they're having this like I don't want to say it's like an LSD like effect, but it's like that. It's like a psychedelic experience and it's happening completely au natural, right? And so to me, that is probably the ultimate, the most amazing, but at the same time, for the average person, how attainable does that seem when you're on the path of the normal like day in day out survival struggle mode? I think that's where psychedelics can be kind of like a spark plug to start to jump that system a little bit and to use them to help generate some of that from an external, it can be very useful in giving people that experience. And then I think motivate them to actually go seek that out more, right? Versus like starting maybe from that baseline of like wow, that seems impossible to have that Joe Dispenza like experience. It isn't impossible, but it can be a very big leap to make when you don't even know what you're shooting for, and it's hard to imagine like getting into that state. And so I think there's a place for both. And I think within using plant medicine, there still needs to be that ultimate understanding the individual within the individual that like I still have to be committed to this path of behavior change. And this isn't a band aid to like replace the work I'm going to do outside of that, right? Because it's going to be hard work no matter which way you look at it. It's just that you can use these medicines to help accelerate and further that, or you could choose not to, but it doesn't take the onus off that person to continue to develop the skills and do the work, right?
Absolutely, I agree
Yeah.
100%. You can't just use plant medicines and expect them to make changes that you wouldn't be willing to make or aren't making an effort to do in your everyday life. And
Yeah.
so the thing is with like these things are with the plant medicines, all the things that they can help you to achieve, we can do naturally without the plant medicines. But like you said, it can be quite challenging. Like a monk can literally stop themselves from feeling pain or laying in the snow, without clothing on, like things like that, which is a mental state that they learn to get to, which can be extremely challenging for someone like us, who's just living in everyday society.
Yeah.
So that's when these plant medicines to help kind of bring that part of us out a bit more. But one thing I did want to say about the plant medicines, just for your viewers who are not familiar with them, is that they do not all cause um, they don't all have psychotropic effects. Like they do not always make you feel, oh, I've taken something. Like CBD, for instance, can aid in pain relief, and you won't feel like you've taken something. You
Mm.
feel maybe a degree of relaxation, coupled with pain relief, depending on what type of strand of CBD you've taken. But
Mhm.
I just wanted to state that for the record, it's not always something that is going to affect your headspace and alter your perception. Some of them can be taken without any of that. So I would definitely encourage you to do your research.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Damien. And along those same lines, the other part too is you can also microdose some of those things that could be heavy hitting, right? Where
Mhm.
you can still utilize these substances, but it's not going to take you down, right? Like you're going to be able to still function through your day and get some degree of benefit. And again, that just kind of gets back to like doing the study, reading up on these things, getting really knowledgeable, and then understanding, okay, if I'm going to move forward and try to use some of these things, like what's going to work best for me? Because I think there's a purpose to both ends. You could absolutely use these lower level, less profound psychotropic things. But on the other end, right, like some of these other substances, like ayahuasca is probably the one that takes the cake. Like, I don't know that there's a way to actually have that experience where you're not dedicating, that time out to go do that, right?
Right.
Like,
No,
I've
that
never
that
heard.
is a
Yeah,
that's a full-on experience. That is something that you prepare
yeah.
for in advance, set time aside, and be prepared for a whole outing. It's not going to be take a pill and feel better. That is an experience. I would highly encourage people to do their research.
Yeah, absolutely. And into that end too, one other thing just on the ayahuasca is I've actually heard of people going on those retreats, having a pretty intense experience, and then coming out of that and saying, holy shit, I'm not ready for this. I need to pause this and then go back and do some more self work. So that's the other kind of caution to this too, is that there's a balance between growing and using some of these tools of self growth and neurological rewiring. You can dabble with the plants, but I think it's just kind of knowing like how far do you want to go with some of these more intense things that could really bring some stuff up that could be it could shake you a little bit, right? If you're not ready for it. So,
Yes, absolutely. Um, and I don't want to continue to drag this out, but as far as ayahuasca is concerned, the active ingredient in ayahuasca is known as dimethyltryptamine,
mhm.
DMT. And
Mhm.
DMT is naturally occurring in every living species on the planet, not just humans, but animals. I think they've even found traces of it in plants.
Mhm.
And they don't completely understand what the molecule is for, but they do understand that it is associated with consciousness somehow. And it's been termed by scientists to be the God molecule. And that is the active ingredient in the ayahuasca. Very,
Yeah.
very interesting stuff.
And I think that's the chemical that gets released when the pituitary gland goes off. Like these people who have these crazy experiences in the Joe Dispenza retreats, I'm pretty
Mhm.
sure it's the same. Like we're capable of producing it in large amounts, but obviously under the very right circumstances where we're really constant. It's not like you're going to be walking around have this happen. You have to actually like develop that and create that capacity. But yeah, that's very true, Damien. It's a pretty powerful chemical from what I understand. So,
Yes.
um, yeah. So as we wrap up, I just want to have you share the best way for the listener to get in touch with you if that's something they're interested in doing. Any resource you want to offer up, I can link all of that in the show notes below this episode.
Awesome. So I just want to again reiterate that coaching provides structure and accountability for helping people reflect on their habits and making meaningful changes. And so, what I offer is life purpose coaching, guidance for men who, even if they're working a 9 to 5 job, they may feel like they could be doing more. Maybe they're not feeling confident, or maybe they just feel like they want to accomplish more. That's what I'm here for. And if you or someone you love, would like some insight into some deeper insight into what I do or my story, you can go to www.therealmancan.com and download a copy of my free ebook, which uh, is some insights about what I've been through and how I utilize that to help others. You could also check out a copy of The Sacred Space of You, which is directed towards both men and women. And it's really about finding a haven within us, our mind, and how to clean it and organize it in a way that when you retreat into yourself and you do start to get to that introspective place, you have this lavish luxurious place to do it, and that is inside of your own mind. So again, and also my coaching services, if you're interested, just visit www.therealmancan.com. You can also find me on social media at the real underscore man underscore dot or the real man can with underscores in between each word.
Perfect. And what's your preferred social platform? Is it Instagram?
Instagram and TikTok, yes.
Perfect. I
And
love that.
YouTube. I'm on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok, yes.
Oh, perfect. I will link your socials and your website, Damien, and I think
Awesome.
that'll be good. People once they hit on those, they'll be able to see the ebooks and the services and stuff. So awesome. Well, I so appreciate having you come on. I know this is a total change up from the nature of thing I talk about, but I really do feel like this is a super relevant area that a lot of women need to hear about. Of course, if there's men out there listening, I think this will really resonate with them as well.
Yes, absolutely. I'm glad. It's my pleasure. I do understand the power of feminine energy, and I have much respect and love for women. So it's an honor to be able to provide my expertise not only to men but to women as well. So thank you for giving me that opportunity.
Did you find this episode informative and helpful? I'd love to have you leave me a 5-star rating. Do you have questions about holistic approaches to optimizing gut health that you'd like to ask? Please leave your question or comment below, and I will be sure to address it personally or cover it in a future episode. Be sure to check the show notes for any resources mentioned in today's episode. See you next time.